Hello, Cheryl.
I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I just sent you an email. I got worried when I saw the time that was listed on the link.
Oh, I'm
It says,
sorry.
it's okay.
We just had Vincent G. Carter
Yeah.
from Homeland Security,
Yeah.
and it just ran over a little bit.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, so I wanted to start out with some questions, and of course, this is going to be on design equity, diversity, and community development, which basically right now, Howard University's interior design program is focusing on more since 2022 or 2020, actually, when the pandemic started. So the first question is, where is the interior design profession going to do to help bridge the gap of design equity in the United States? This is in reference to neighborhood development, community development, and housing equity.
Yeah, I think there's an internal question for the profession there, and I think there's an external. And so what I know is happening internally from organizations like IIDA and ASID and AIA, kind of all of the organizations that are engaged in the built environment, we're looking really carefully at population and demographics, right? And then I know that from IIDA and the work that we've done, the surveying and research that we've done, that Black and brown people comprise only about 2.5% to 3% of our membership, for example. And if you kind of extend that and look at firms across the country, unless it was a firm that was started or is owned by a person of color, the population of people of color working in the design profession as a whole is woefully minuscule. So there are changes afoot that have been happening for some organizations for years. Others, it became a reaction to kind of the post the murder of George Floyd, when right all of a sudden it feels like everybody except us, us here, started paying attention to what the design profession looked like and felt like. So there's that internal piece of it. Externally, clients, end users, customers, consumers are asking questions about who's doing their work. Right. And so we've heard for years, the research that's been done by Deloitte, the research that's been done by McKinsey. What we all know in our heart and soul is that diversity is good business. It took that kind of, I think, capitalist aspect for a lot of organizations, corporations on the for-profit side, to realize that diversity meant profit for them. It meant brand share to them. On the for-profit side, you have investors and shareholders being deeply concerned about how business is being done, right? Sustainability had that same trajectory. And so I think in this moment that we're living through, with all of the efforts around equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice, that it is very much a conversation that design is deeply, deeply involved in. If you start expanding beyond that and we look at the design of our cities, if we look at the fact that in some cities like Flint and Jackson, Mississippi, where there are issues simply getting water to human beings, that's a design issue, right? It's a political issue, but it also is a design issue. And I think that this larger conversation is doing nothing but helping build a larger awareness of design and design equity. There aren't a lot of answers yet, but but the best design starts with the question why. And we have so many people asking why or why not, that in programs like yours, in many design programs across the country, we are seeing an expansion of people of color majoring in design, majoring in urban design and industrial design, kind of design with a capital D. And I think the sheer fact of that is going to change our profession and the perception of our profession, because that's the other key here is many people, when we're talking about whether it's residential design or commercial design, they see design as a luxury and not a necessity. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned in the pandemic that a lot of, not us, but end users, customers, consumers, clients have learned is that design is very much a necessity in our lives.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And also, I'm going to go to the next question. And this is, in the corporate sector, how can a fellow interior design professionals will be able to create a better atmosphere for diversity in corporate firms, government agencies, and small business sector?
Mm-hmm. I think, probably one of the two words that we can use that are most resonant for human beings: you belong. I see you, I hear you, you belong. And we often, in the profession of design, most specifically interiors, we have not heard the words "you belong." We have not heard the words "you are not alone." So many design professionals have kind of that only lonely syndrome, whether they were the only person of color in their design program, whether they were the only person of color in their interior studio, or in their firm, or if they work for a product manufacturer. And again, we're seeing changes there. But what we can all do, I think, is it's incumbent on all designers, regardless of ethnicity. I think as a designer, you are not only a lifelong learner, but you're also a lifelong educator. And it becomes very much our duty to, go back to that grade school that you went to, go back to that high school that you went to, and have those conversations. Go to a career day, that design has a place for people who look like us. I think because it has often been regarded as not a high net worth career, or not a career, right, a career that is invested in luxury as opposed to necessity. I think we have traditionally not seen a lot of people of color, not seen a lot of immigrants entering the design profession. People see design not as a career, but as a pursuit, as something, as an artistic pursuit, as a hobby, as opposed to career. So we also have to have our elevator speech and our talking points around why design is a viable career for anyone, right? And not just in Black and brown communities. There's just a lot of people out there who do not understand design or interior design.
Okay, and oftentimes they confuse interior designers as decorators. And that was something in the past.
Correct. There's a lot of confusion around what it means to be a professional, registered, certified interior designer. I don't want to take anything away from decorators. They do what they do. They have a body of knowledge that's very specific. They do what they do. It's economically driven. But decorating is part of the picture, but professional interior design is something else. And professional interior designers, I know that you had Vincent Carter speak, and Vincent was the first Black president of NCIDQ that administers the exam. And right, the professional interior designers have the education, the examination, and the experience. And they are recognized in the state or jurisdiction in which they practice. Interior design is not only about aesthetics, not only about efficiency, not only about functionality. It is, we are concerned with the health, safety, and well-being of those who inhabit the spaces that we create.
Okay, well, here's the third question. Where can we as African-American interior design professionals can be able to work toward diversity in our specialties and in our professional practice? So
I think
elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think continuing to connect with one another through professional organizations. I think mentoring students. I think being visible in the majority community, in our own communities. Again, it's that we're constantly educating about design and the viability and vitality of design. I think the more that we are seen in the world, and whether that's designers who are working in the residential realm, or in healthcare, or hospitality, or retail. So whenever there's a chance for one of us to be interviewed by a mainstream publication or a shelter publication or a consumer publication. When any of us are working on projects, we need to fight for visibility when we're on a project team as well, making sure our names are, in those portfolios and in those firm portfolios and on firm websites. I think the more that we are visible, that's a small piece of the pie, but it's an important piece of the pie, is we need to be seen doing what we're doing as well. That's important.
That's a good idea. A lot of times we're not seen, or we're part of companies, but the company doesn't always see us. They see us part of the project.
Yeah.
So
and looking also, Professor Shanklin, also looking for opportunities where you can be a design evangelist, a design advocate, a design champion. And so local library boards are always looking for a public member. And if that public member is a designer, all the more helpful. And so think about those places in your own community. I often hear in the many years that I've been the CEO of IIDA, I've often heard designers say that often interior design doesn't get a seat at the table. Well, sometimes the seat at the table isn't given to us. We have to, right? What the Shirley Chisholm saying is that, if they don't give you a seat at the table, then pull up a folding chair. And we often need to craft our own seat at the table. And so putting yourself in places like sitting on a library board, any kind of public forum where you have the ability to talk about design and share your expertise. Often hospital boards need that design voice. Your own HOA, your housing association, community associations, that gets the design voice in a very public forum. And anything that we can do to gain visibility for design as a career, for design as an expertise, and then people of color who have those voices in those public places, that's so important.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on to, let's see, the fourth question. In the major cities in the United States, how can interior design students help improve their environment when it comes to working on community development projects?
So very often in community development projects, there's often a peer review or there's a stakeholder review. And so if you're interning, for instance, in Chicago, and there's a project happening in the neighborhood that you're living in or working in, again, getting your voice in as part of that community voice is incredibly important. If you are working at a firm and that firm has a connection, again, to a community, involvement is the key. I think that, the days of sitting back are long gone, and design and activism go hand in hand. And we just need to be more vocal and more forthright and look for those opportunities where we can be seen and be heard.
Okay.
But community comment is one of the best ways to do that. And so whether or not you're in a firm and working on a project, chances are you're living or working in a neighborhood where if there is particularly a public project that is happening and the public is invited to comment, that's the opportunity to have your design voice. I said divine, that kind of works too. Your divine design voice heard.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind. And we'll go on to the fifth question. And here, let me see if I can bring that up real quick. Just a moment.
Yep.
Okay, the fifth question. For new interior design students in the profession, how can they improve their abilities and their opportunities in the corporate sector in interior design practice? And what is the best way for them to start in that sector of this profession? And so oftentimes we don't see too many of them in the corporate sector.
On the corporate sector or
right.
Workplace. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, and in fact, probably I've seen more designers of color, more African American designers on within healthcare, within government and institutional and higher ed, often not as many in workplace. And sometimes that depends on the firm that you're at. So if there is a workplace studio in the firm that you're working at, but maybe you've been maybe targeted in healthcare or hospitality, that's that opportunity to maybe go to a studio principal, and you've got translatable skills. Often workplace loves to incorporate what's happening in healthcare, what's happening in hospitality, what's happening in retail. That becomes an opportunity to have a conversation with either your mentor at the firm, because that's another important piece of this, is all of us need champions and mentors within the firms that we're at, or external. But if you've got a firm mentor, that's an opportunity to have that conversation. And then going to that studio principal and being very explicit about the skills that you have that can translate to workplace, right? Because at the end of the day, you're creating place for people. And whether those people are in an office, or whether those people are in an acute care facility, or whether those people are at a resort or in a restaurant, you're creating place and you're creating experience. And so all of those experiences are hyper connected. And so it becomes our responsibility as designers to be able to really firmly articulate the connections between the disciplines and how our skills. So if you're deeply involved in healthcare, you can take those related skills and translate those to workplace. So again, it comes back to self-advocating, but then also have that mentor, that champion in your corner who can also speak to your skills.
Okay, and mentorship is very important. And I would assume that would be something for most design students, even those of course, like ourselves, oftentimes that we're not always seeing. Now, the sixth question is, do you see great opportunities for both interior design and architect students in the profession where diversity will be important for their development? So, for both disciplines, oftentimes in our university, we sometimes cross over.
Right.
We'll have some interior design students that will minor in architecture, and you have some architect students that will take a minor in interior design.
Right. And again, depending on the firm that you ultimately end up working on, if it's a large interior design firm, your voice as an interior designer will be heard. If it's a large architecture firm or an engineering firm, right, the big A, big E firms, but it has a small interior design, studio, you have to fight a little harder to get your voice heard as an interior designer. And you also will have to educate those other allied professionals about your skill set as an interior designer, right? Because we often hear, again, as you mentioned, that sometimes when people hear interior designer, what they think is decorator. And so very often interior designers who are in those large architectural or engineering firms will find themselves involved in conversations around if it involves color, if it involves accessories. You want to be in the meaty conversations around budget and expediting and specifying, because those are within your playbook. Those are within your expertise as an interior designer. So you are probably going to need to, again, advocate for your background, your education, what you've learned as a professional interior designer, because other professions, while we as interior designers get very educated about all of those folks at a table on a project, so anywhere from the general contractor to engineering to facilities to the architects at the table, they often are not as aware or as well educated about what interior designers do professionally, although we tend to have a larger body of knowledge about the other players at the table.
Okay, And so again, with teaming helps also, working in
Yes.
teams.
Absolutely. Working collaboratively, I think, is, just kind of inherent in the skill set of interior designers. It's just something that interior designers do really, really well. And so that project team that you ultimately will be working with, you're going to need, just as long as you're aware that will need to spend a fair amount of time, fairly or unfairly, educating them about what you bring to the table.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good answer. And we're going to go on to the seventh question, and is, do you see great opportunities for both interior design and architect students in the profession in the United States and as well as in abroad? So in other words, in overseas. So like right now, where we are in the pandemic, well, I'm assuming this is the third year, but we're supposed to be out of it. Now,
Yeah.
do you see a change where we'll be able to expand more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So many large corporations, but also the biotech industry, healthcare as a whole, every country on the face of the earth is getting older. And so the focus on senior living, elder care, because life and living has gotten expensive, affordable housing, co-living, kind of all the ways that we live and work and play require design. And so there is an explosive opportunity for the next 5 years for organizations who are looking for design thinkers, design strategists, people who can help them as organizations think about. So it's not just a project, right? So every engagement for an interior designer doesn't always end in a built project. It could be that you're hired, and that's part of the future forecasting for design. It could be that you're ultimately hired by anybody from the gaming industry to the real estate industry, to the general contracting industry, kind of you name it. All of those companies are looking for design thinkers and design strategists, and everybody's trying to figure out the people question, right? So in workplace, we're trying to entice people to come back to the workplace. That's above and beyond change management. In healthcare, and this is both domestically and internationally. Obviously, healthcare, that speaks for itself. Senior living, as we are all getting older, what do we need around us? People are living longer, which means they're working longer. Within the realm of neurodiversity, we're thinking more about how people think differently and what that means and how we design for differences. So there is such vast opportunity for designers and architects for the next 5 years, both locally in the States and internationally.
Okay. And you mentioned design strategist as a term. What does that really mean? Because I've seen that term, and I know this is off the original question.
Yeah, no worries.
So much.
So what I'm seeing more and more often, and I think this is a good thing, people are viewing design as a long-term strategy and not just a short-term solution, right? And so most design engagements, a lot of times designers get hired to, either because somebody's moving. Design is a real estate event, right? And so a company is moving from point A to point B. They're redesigning their workplace. Now companies are working with designers as strategists. And why I think this is so beautiful is designers are getting now paid and recognized for how they think and not just what they do. And so it's going to end up resulting for all of us, for all designers, in even better fee structures and a better pay scale. But we're at that point where many people are appreciative, and I mean that in the best way, appreciative of the way designers think. Designers think tactically and designers think strategically. You're thinking about now and you're thinking about next. And companies are hiring designers not always to design a place or a space, but to help them think about the future. And so if your workforce looks like this, if your workforce is currently, a group of 30-year-olds who are hybrid workers now, and they're working from home 3 days a week and coming into the office 2 days a week, that may not be the reality 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And so instead of going out and hiring consultants and hiring KPMG and Deloitte or McKinsey, a lot of the places that people would hire consultants to previously kind of solve those kinds of issues, they're coming to designers to help solve those problems. And I'm increasingly seeing HR directors and large HR organizations working in tandem with designers about solving these issues. Because again, I think what a lot of companies are now realizing, design is about what happens on the receiving end, right? So design is about, crafting something better, kinder, more functional, more beautiful, more efficient. And you're not doing it as a designer for yourself. It's for that person who's on the receiving end. And again, more and more companies are starting to realize this as well and hiring designers for how they think and not just for what they do.
More companies are seeing this. And so that's why they put, that emphasis on a design strategist.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
the only thing that
profession.
It's so that the only thing that worries me about that are the people who are calling themselves design strategists, but don't have the benefit of a design education. So that worries me a little bit, but I don't have a problem with an interior designer calling themselves, knowing that you're a professional interior designer, you're an interior designer and a design strategist. I can help your company think about people. Like I would put that on my resume.
Keep that in mind. Now, the last question is actually a little more about you as a professional. And can you give us some insight in your past experiences as a certified interior design professional for our students and how you started out in the interior design profession?
Mm-hmm. So I'm currently the CEO of IIDA, the International Interior Design Association. I'm actually not a designer. My background is business. And journalism. So I started my career as a writer, actually there in Washington, D.C. I worked at the Washington Design Center. And so far too many years than I want to remember. I actually worked, the Washington Design Center at the time was at 3rd and D Street Southwest. It's at right on top of the Federal Center Metro Station. Yes. And I was hired, I actually taught, I was a high school teacher. Taught at Theodore Roosevelt High School, and the father of one of my students said, you know what, I like the way you use words. I kind of like your style. Have you ever thought about a career in sales? And he worked for Knoll. And so I worked in sales. I was the federal sales manager for Knoll for many years and worked for, sold to embassies. And I got a little bit of travel, but then the Merchandise Mart, who owned the Washington Design Center, hired me a way to create the first curriculum because legislation was coming to the district, to Maryland and Virginia. And at the time, IIDA was called IBD, but IBD
that acronym.
Yeah, IBD and ASID, and I created the first curriculum because continuing education was a requirement for interior design legislation. And so I created a curriculum for designers. So a series of courses that were required to get your license. And I did that at the Washington Design Center. So I went from teaching high school to moving into a product manufacturer and then working for the Merchandise Mart. That's where I met my husband. He ran Neocon in Chicago. And so we moved to Chicago, and at the time, IIDA was formed, and they were looking for a director of education. And so this kind of thread of teaching has run through my career. And so I became the director of education at IIDA. It's the only not-for-profit job I've ever had. And then I did that for a couple of years, and the board came to me and asked me if I wanted to be CEO. And it wasn't just because they were like, hey, do you want to be CEO? My predecessor, as sometimes happens in not-for-profit organizations, had embezzled over $1 million from the organization. And they needed someone with a business background who could kind of analyze the situation and then fix the situation. And so that's what I did. And I've been doing this for 25 years. So it's been it feels very connected. Like if I look at my resume, everything that I've done seems to have made sense. But I also know that while I was in the midst of some of these experiences, I said yes to things that that if you told me any number of years ago that I would have done any of this, I would have said, no, I don't think so. But the ability to communicate, the ability to be persuasive, the ability, confidence is an ability, the ability to talk about the importance of a profession and your part in that profession is critical. And I firmly believe in lifelong learning and lifelong educating. So I've loved every moment of what I've done. I never could have predicted it. But I've always kind of said yes to a lot of things career-wise, professionally, that at the end of the day have made a lot of sense.
Okay, and again, Howard University have, well, I think since 2020, we started our own IIDA campus chapter.
Yes.
And hopefully it's going to be thriving. And we do look forward to one day that you will actually visit our campus.
I would love to. I
Yes.
would love to. I can't wait to do that. I want to make sure that we stay connected and you get on my calendar. So that's part of what I do. I probably pre-pandemic, I spent about 35 weeks out of every year traveling, doing presentations and lectures. And I've never had the pleasure or privilege of doing one at Howard, but I'd love to. On my international board of directors, Mike Johnson, who's the director of interiors at Hickok Cole.
Yes, I do know
Mike
him.
is a,
yes.
Yeah, Mike is a Howard grad. And so he's new on the international board of directors. So I'm excited to come see you. I want to also make sure that we connect and I get the names of all the students. I have something I'm going to send everybody as well. So
oh, wow. So you actually would like all the names of the students?
If you can get me names and contact information, I'd love to, would love to send everybody something.
Okay, and I'll definitely forward everything over to our department chair and Professor Carmichael.
Okay.
Jacqueline Carmichael. She's head of our department. And so we will send everything out and she will definitely we'll be happy to schedule an actual visit.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
I love that. And I just a word of encouragement to all of your students. A few things for your, obviously, always make sure you have a portfolio, a digital portfolio, or a traditional portfolio ready to show to anyone. Every opportunity is an opportunity to present yourself and present your work. Make sure you communicate your passion about design, but also your seriousness about design and how design, what design means to you and what design means to the world. Design firms hire designers, yes, but they also hire human beings. And so when someone is interviewing you, make sure you talk about your interests outside of design, whether it's cooking or roller skating or reading or whatever it is you're interested in. Make sure that becomes a part of the conversation that you're having when you're being interviewed. And then make connections with folks that are interviewing you. If you belong to IIDA, if you belong to NOMA, if you belong to the Management Association, make sure you're letting those folks that are interviewing you know the organizations that you belong to. Just because you are volunteering doesn't make it any less of a viable work experience. Just because you're not getting paid for it doesn't mean that you don't put it on your resume. So if you chaired a committee for an organization that you volunteer for, make sure that's showing up in your resume. And always, 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 3 important words to put on your resume: willing to relocate. If you are able to live and work anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, let a potential employer know that, because there are so many opportunities out there and resumes get put into a couple of piles, and people who don't indicate that they're willing to relocate, that's often a pile that's not always looked at. So that ability to pick up and move, because you won't always be able to do that at many points in your life. But at this point in your life, you may very well be able to pick up and live anywhere. You've got to let folks know that you can do that too. Okay.
Well, again, I wanted to thank you for also your time in answering some of our questions, and as part of an evening with Cheryl Durst. executive, I'm hoping I said this correctly, executive director, CEO of IIDA.
Right.
And we definitely enjoyed your insight in what possibilities there are for future interior designers and also future architects in our profession,
Absolutely.
especially those of color.
Absolutely, absolutely. And please share my contact information with the students. We'll get, like I said, I'll get something to everybody, but please share my contact information.
Yes.
If anybody has any questions, if you already have a job or you're looking at internships or any specific markets, I'm happy to help. Either if I can't do it, certainly someone on my staff, we can certainly let you know. Almost every firm is hiring right now. In this day and age, there's no such thing as an unemployed interior designer. So now's a really good time to be prepping, because who knows, the world could, as we know, how quickly the world can change. And so, look for those internships, look for those jobs, and look for your mentors. Having a mentor and a champion and someone who's going to support you and advocate for you. I can't stress how important that is.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much. And this concludes our series. And again, this is part of the series for the Howard University third annual Interior Design Story. So again, thank you very much, Cheryl.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening.
Yep. Take care. Good luck,
Okay.
everybody.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.